Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. And today we have something that is definitely fitting of the unusual marker. I'm talking about a book that I read, and it is a book that is about magical lands and being cursed or gifted, depending on who you ask. I am referring to Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine, which was published in 1997. For those who don't know, Gail Carson Levine is an American author who has been writing since the late 80s, although like many authors, especially women authors, she didn't get her work published until sometime later, getting most of it published in the mid to late 90s. She mostly writes about magic and sort of fantasy stories, books about princesses and romance and fighting against evil fairy tale creatures of some sort. She seems to take some inspiration from Tolkien, which you see in the afterword of what I'm talking about today, like my edition of Ella Enchanted, I believe the 25th anniversary edition. She specifically notes that she liked the language system that Tolkien created, so she created her own in this book, which I think is pretty fascinating. And she's also been given a number of awards for her work, including the Newbery for this specific book, and that's why I'm talking about it today. I always love to highlight the Newbery winners because it's somewhat of an indicator of quality, especially with Holes and A Light in the Dark by Christine Sonternvat, and another one that I talked about that I'm forgetting the name of, but it was sort of middle of the road for me, but it was still a pretty good story. So yeah, I'm very happy to be talking about Gail and her book Ella Enchanted today. Without further ado, let's talk about Ella Enchanted. I will do some spoilers, so if you want to go check it out, and I'm going to recommend that you go check it out, definitely do so, and then come back and watch this review. But yeah, without further ado, I'll do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Ella Enchanted focuses, of course, on a teenager named Ella of Frel in a magical medieval kingdom, that being Frel. There are ogres and dragons and princes and whatnot, and fairy creatures as well. Sounds like a very lovely place, but unfortunately, Ella has been cursed, or she's been gifted, again, depending on who you ask. The fairy Lucinda showed up at her birth and gave her the gift of obedience. So she has to obey every single order, no matter how uncomfortable and how dangerous it is to her. And as a result, she feels very uncomfortable in most situations because she never feels like she has control over herself. And before her mother dies, she tells her, don't tell anyone about this curse. They could use it against you. And at her mother's funeral, she runs into members of the royal kingdom. They liked Ella's mother, especially Prince Char, who Ella becomes acquainted with. They grow to be friends, and he seems to like her in a romantic sense, although Ella does not catch on until later in the story. Ella is sent to live with her father, her absentee father, Sir Peter, who is a merchant who does a lot of traveling, and he decides to send her to finishing school, and in order to teach her manners and whatnot, but also because he wants to marry her away for money sometime, which is not good fathering, and so she has to go to finishing school for that. And Sir Peter also seems to be in somewhat of a romantic relationship with Dame Olga, who they're both kind of leaning on each other for money, but they don't know it. And Ella runs into their daughters, Hattie and Olive, who are mean people. Hattie even figures out about the curse, and so she just uses that to her advantage, ordering Ella around and taking things from her that she values. And when Ella gets to finishing school, she finds that she hates it because she can't meet with their high expectations, especially because because they don't give very specific orders. They're just like, do this or do that. So Ella has to do it, but she's never doing it in a way that they would want. And so Ella just has a miserable time there, although she does meet a person, another young girl called Areta, and they become close friends, although Hattie tells her to break off the friendship, which Ella doesn't really do. She kind of just decides to flee the school, and she does that because she hears that there's a giant wedding taking place, a Waxy's wedding, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and so she wants to go there because she thinks Lucinda might be there, and she might be able to end the gift or the curse, and everything will be good for Ella. And along the way, she runs into elves who are very friendly, ogres who want to eat her, and Prince Char again, who helps her defeat the ogres, and they grow a little bit closer in the process. At Waxy's wedding, Ella runs into Lucinda. Although she doesn't tell her that she gave her a gift, she just tells her that she was cursed with obedience her whole life. Although Lucinda does recognize that is a gift that she's given away before, and she just tells Ella that she should be happy that she has this gift, to which Ella has no choice now but to be happy, even though she realizes inside she's miserable. She can't resist that feeling, and so she just decides to obey every single order, and it's made even worse by the fact that her father gives her elf mushrooms, which are sort of an aphrodisiac of some sort, kind of a roofie in a way. And like he gives it to her because he wants her to marry some regal man, some man of money, who is a bit far older than her, and Ella has no choice but to be happy around him initially, although Sir Peter breaks it off once he figures out that the man has no money, and he leaves Ella to continue to find other relationships for her. Sir Peter, who is in desperate financial straits, decides to marry Dame Olga later in the story, and Lucinda shows up to that too, and Ella has to hide so Lucinda can't see her and do worse things. Luckily, Mandy's able to break the curse that Lucinda put on her again by giving her another order that countermands Lucinda's order. But Lucinda gives a gift to Peter and Olga that they will forever love each other, which makes them both miserable because they're actually not really marrying each other for love. They're doing it for money. And they're both, unfortunately, surprised to find that Sir Peter doesn't really have any money. But again, they're still together, but Sir Peter decides to travel abroad and be away from Dame Olga, unfortunately leaving Ella alone with Dame Olga and Hattie and Olive, which doesn't really go well because they order her around again, and they basically make her a servant. She begins writing letters to Prince Char, who's off in foreign lands, and he confesses his love for her, but Ella realizes that she can't be with Prince Char because it would be too dangerous. Someone could give her an order to kill him. So she breaks it off and tells him that she's going to marry some other person for their money, which upsets Prince Char. And meanwhile, Mandy, the fairy that's living with Ella, finds Lucinda and tells her, if you like these gifts so much, you should try living under them. Lucinda does that. She lives as a squirrel for a couple months, which is miserable to her, and she also does the obedience thing, and that does not work out for her. But she also swears off doing magic, so she can't fix things for Ella exactly. And then a short while later, Prince Char comes back to the kingdom, and his father throws 3 balls for him. But Ella, again, because they broke things off and Ella doesn't want to be around him, she decides that the only thing she can do is just go to the 3 balls in a disguise in an effort to see him one last time before he goes off somewhere else in the world. She goes to the ball with the help of Lucinda, who does the Cinderella treatment for her. She's able to find and dance with Prince Char in her disguise for the first couple nights. But then on the 3rd night, Hattie takes off her mask and reveals her to be Ella. And so Ella runs home and pretends to be a servant again. But Prince Char and the family catch up with her. And at that point, Prince Char asks her to tell him if she loves her or not, which she says yes, because she has to follow that. And then he's like, well, tell me you want to marry me. And at that point, she has to fight the curse because she wants to, but she also doesn't want to hurt hurt him. And so she says no, breaking the curse. And she ultimately decides that it's her choice to want to marry Prince Char. And so she proposes marriage to him. And it seems that the curse is broken. The marriage happens and everything lives happily ever after, presumably. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with Ella Enchanted. The main idea that Levine is talking about here is obedience. Levine is talking about specifically the perils of obedience and providing teenagers with something to think about in the process. Because this curse or this gift, depending on who you want to talk to, it's not easy for Ella. Like she's constantly forced to do things that she doesn't want to do, forced to give up objects that she loves, such as her mother's necklace to Hattie in some cases, because that person asks for it and demands it. And if she realizes that if someone like really wants to be malicious about it, they can force her to do some pretty dastardly things, and they can even use it to make them feel like completely like powerless or something like that. Like, because Lucinda's like, oh, you can feel you should feel happy about this, and so she knows that she's not, but she has no choice but to feel that way, because resisting that the curse, resisting this gift, will bring her nothing but mental anguish. There's a good quote that I would like to read to you from this. It was the same every day. I dreaded new orders. The curse didn't make me change easily. I had to concentrate every second. In my mind, I repeated my commands in an endless refrain. When I awoke, I instructed myself not to bounce out of bed. Leave the night dress for the servants to put away. At breakfast, don't blow on my porridge, and don't spit out the lumps. On our afternoon walk, don't skip, don't leap about. And that's a very interesting passage from the story, because it shows that obeying every single order that she's being given isn't easy for Ella, and that she has to think about it. And if she doesn't do it, if she doesn't remember that specific thing that she has to obey, it causes her great pain. And it makes just for a miserable time, not only in finishing school, but in the kingdom, in our various day-to-day activities. It's like you have to remember all these commands and do things a specific way to appease these people, but also to appease the curse. It's generally not a good time for Ella. I like how Levine gets at that internal anguish that she's feeling, because in the movie of Ella Enchanted, like you see a lot of the obeying side of things, but you don't see what's going on in her mind. And it really shows the sadness that she feels when she has to keep going through this every single day. And you see it used against her, as I mentioned before, but you also see obedience in other areas, such as with the elf mushrooms, her father wanting her to marry her off to some rich guy against her will, like just giving her elf mushrooms, which sort of trick her into believing that she actually loves somebody. And then also the idea of finishing school, of obedience school, it being like a place you send women, during this time period, during like medieval times, but also it still kind of exists today in the form of like Catholic school or something like that. So Levine is taking this theme of obedience as far as she possibly can here. What's interesting, though, is Ella seems to break this curse on her own terms. Like, she's not simply having like Lucinda break the curse for her. I like that about Levine here, is that she doesn't just have it be an ex machina of sorts. Rather, she she has Ella deal with the problem internally, fight it on her terms, realize that she doesn't want to be with Prince Char if it means having the potential of her being used like for evil or something like that. And so realizing that she has to make the choice, like she has to want to make the choice to marry Prince Char, and so it becomes her choice as she fights it, and when she gets one over on the curse. So I like that sort of breaking the curse in a way that's fitting of Ella's rebellious side here. But also what's interesting is like how this is sort of like Levine making a commentary on how we perceive teens at large, especially teenage girls. Like we typically picture teens as these rebellious youths, but parents, especially like adults, still expect them to be obedient and follow very specific rules that they crafted that sometimes inadvertently like harm aspects of their identity and force them to behave in ways that they're not really comfortable with. And so Levine is very clearly arguing here that, you can't force teens to be obedient all the time, and that they're individual beings with emotions and feelings. And it's important to ask them, like, do you feel comfortable doing these things? Like, obviously there's things they have to agree with and they can't really fight, but there are aspects of individuality and whatnot that form during your teenage years, that forcing people into a box and expecting them to act a certain way isn't really good. So Levine, that you could argue that this is, a commentary on teenagehood in general, or perhaps a little bit of feminism sprinkled into the story. What's also interesting is Levine's incorporation of magic and fairy tales into this world. It appears that Neil Gaiman isn't the only one establishing a very rich magical world in his writings. Levine is doing it here too. Like, she creates this world of ogres who are kind of written as vampires who can, like, trick you into doing things you don't want to do. You got these very vast kingdoms, fairies who can grant wishes of some kind, or not wishes, but who can grant gifts or curses, giants, gnomes, and even a gnomic language. Like, Levine invents her own separate language here, which is impressive. I really like how the gnomic language is, because she even notes herself, like, it's written backwards, but it's still written in complete gibberish, so it's just weird to say, with weird capitalization sprinkled in through here. It's something you can, like, you can say that she's building off of Tolkien. Like, there's a very interesting connection between The Lord of the Rings and Enchanted there, which helps create this interesting world that feels lived in, that feels vibrant, and sort of you kind of want to stay in, much like with the some aspects of the movie as well. So I got to give Levine credit there. And also the story is kind of adjacent to Cinderella, and that's where the fairy tales kind of come in, because you have some elements of Cinderella where Ella's mother dies and she has to live with her stepmother and stepsisters who are very mean to her, and then she goes to a ball, or actually there's three of them, and on the last night she has to rush home in order to hide from the prince so that they don't find out the ugly truth about them. And then the prince comes home and slips the slipper on the princess and whatnot. And so you can see the similarities of Cinderella there. Although I do think that Levine follows this format to a fault, which I'll note earlier. It's just one of the issues is that she kind of uses the ending of Cinderella as sort of an outline for the story, and it feels a little too easy, especially given that much of the rest of the story is about sort of a rejection or maybe a little bit of a satire of those fairy tales, kind of showing a fairy tale teenager who's following her own path. I also like how Levine is writing about love here. What's interesting is the relationship between Ella and Prince Char, and how it's built on discovering one another and getting to know one another. It's not simply love at first sight. Ella gets to know Char and feels connected to him in that way. But what's especially interesting is how Char, like, he seems to give few commands to Ella, whereas other people tell her to do this or that. He really leaves it up to her to feel the love in the relationship. There are exceptions to this, which I think only heighten and amplify my interest in that sort of plot line. One being when they're at the dance at one of the balls, he's like, stop right there, because he wants to catch up with this woman who's very interesting. So it's not really a mean command, it's more of just like a turn of phrase that he might not realize. And then when they're finally back at the house and they're trying to figure out what the deal is with Ella, he's like, do you love me? Tell me you love me. In which that's more of a kind of emotion-based thing. So it doesn't really kind of he's not really trying to demand. He's just trying to figure out what's up with her. And then he's also like, well, tell me you'll marry me then. And again, that's more of a desperation thing. But it's interesting that the only times that Prince Char really gives those commands is when it's a moment of desperation of trying to figure out why this girl that you love, who seems to love you back, isn't really clear in what her nature is. That she seems to be hiding something that she won't tell you about. Which is fascinating. I also think Lucinda is a very well written character. We only see her her for like a few pages. Like we get a limited perspective of who Lucinda is, but in those pages are Levine uses her time very well there. We learned that Lucinda is very arrogant until she tries out the gifts on herself, and we learned that she she doesn't really think before she does things. So like she just says, oh, like you should be happy that you have this gift, and Ella's like, okay, yeah, I guess I am. And it makes her somewhat of a horror villain in that regard, without maybe Levine realizing it, but it makes me very fascinating about this character, and I want to learn a little bit more about her. But I think what we're given is good enough, because if we were to learn more about Lucinda, it would kind of lose its charm there. And for the most part, this is a really good story. Just the one problem that I noted before is that the ending adheres a little too much to the Cinderella formula. Like the story just seems to be traveling on its own, doing its own thing, and then it wants to adhere to the Cinderella formula. And at near the end, I was kind of sighing a little bit because I thought it was just going to do the Cinderella thing. I'm very happy that it showed that Ella was making the choice on her own. And I just realized Ella Enchanted, Cinderella Enchanted. Like, I feel so stupid now, but that's why it's, Levine is definitely doing a lot more to, incorporate Cinderella than I had realized, but like given that it's so much different than the original Cinderella story, and that the end just kind of closely follows it more than anything else, it's one of the weaker elements, but it doesn't sink the story. It's just one of my few complaints here. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine. A really solid story, and one that I'll always talk about. Is like I really value when authors treat young adults as worthy of respect and good writing. And here we see good respect and good writing, saying, like people might expect you to be obedient at times, but you should always question it, and people should always, ask you, if you're comfortable being this kind of obedient. It's a good message to be sending out there. And so, yeah, I definitely recommend it to you if you're, adult or even a teenager watching this. It's a pretty solid book, and one that I think will grow on you over time. It especially got me thinking a lot about it, even as a couple days have passed. So yeah, if you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Ella Enchanted. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and possibly join the Discord so that other people can find out about Ella Enchanted, or so you can find out more about Gail Carson Levine, because I'm sure she has other books that might interest you as well. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and fairy tale travels. Farewell.